Hello, everybody. I'm Nathaniel Stinnett, the founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project. And today we have a mini briefing. So it'll be about 6 to 8 minutes on a really interesting topic. So today we're going to be discussing not the messaging experiments that have worked for us. So not the ones that have increased turnout with statistical significance, but instead, we're going to discuss the messaging experiments that didn't work. We think it's really important for multiple reasons to talk about the failures, the messages that didn't work. One, because we want others to learn from us, because maybe they have the same ideas to test message A or message B, and they can say, oh, look, the Environmental Voter Project tried this and it didn't work. But also, we like to approach everything with, I think, a healthy amount of Socratic ignorance. We know that we don't know a lot. And by discussing it with a community of like-minded individuals, they might be able to point things out and let us know, oh, how about you tweak it this way or tweak it that way? And we also just want our volunteers and our donors to know that we're really open about our successes and failures. And we want them to know the way that we think, the types of processes we go through before we actually test a message and then how we test it. So I'm going to share my screen and we have some slides here. So here we are, a mini briefing on unsuccessful EVP messaging experiments. We're going to talk about two experiments in particular here. And the first one, I know it's kind of silly looking, is a digital ad that relies on the concept of face processing. So all primates, whether they be human or non-human primates, have this innate hardwired ability, almost from birth, to, in really nuanced ways, process facial expressions. And it remains really, really strong with us throughout our lives, such that there is an experiment that I read about that took place in the United Kingdom that I just absolutely loved, that led us to try to test this particular ad. And the experiment in the UK was, maybe you're all familiar with those flashing electronic speed limit signs that show you the speed that you're traveling at, and they say maybe like too fast, or slow down. Well, it turns out those don't work too well. But this great experiment took place based on face processing, where in addition to saying slow down if you were going too fast, the sign showed a frowny face. And the most amazing thing happened. Not only did people slow down, they so aggressively slowed down that became a problem. They were like slamming on their brakes, because it turns out we are innately wired. We are hardwired to react negatively to frowny faces and react positively to smiley faces. So we read that behavioral psychology experiment and we thought, you know what? Let's try to apply this to voters. So we pushed this digital ad towards low propensity environmental voters. I think it was in Florida for the 2022 midterms. And we simply said, voter, smiley face, non-voter, frowny face. We thought this was something that was really worth testing, especially because we also know, in addition to this face processing background, that people are an identity-crazed species. And we don't necessarily focus on the value of a particular action, like voting or not voting, as much as we focus on our own identities. Do we want to be thought of as a happy or sad person? And so we really wanted to push that. And we thought this would be worthwhile testing. Well, nope. Well, maybe it was worthwhile testing, but it certainly didn't increase turnout at all. When we looked at the low propensity environmental voters in our control group, so those who did not get this digital ad pushed at them, they turned out at 25.0%. When we looked at the people who did get this digital ad pushed at them, they turned out at 25.0%. So there was no increase in turnout whatsoever. This experiment did not work. But perhaps this will give you some insight into the types of things we test, the types of experiments that we see other people do that we think, oh, maybe this can be applied to the voting space. Maybe we can use this successful experiment in trying to change people's driving behavior and apply it to their voting behavior. In this particular context, it didn't work. And this was a pretty aggressive digital ad buy. I think we were buying it at something like 25 or 26 cents per target voter per week. And it lasted for 2 weeks. So, that's a pretty healthy buy. I think the average of our target voters probably saw this ad 40 or 50 times over that 2-week period in Florida. It didn't work, but hopefully we learn from our mistakes, and hopefully you learn sort of the way that we approach these things at the Environmental Voter Project. All right, the second of the 2 unsuccessful experiments I want to go into is one that's based off of norm enforcement. This was also a digital ad that we pushed to a different population of low propensity environmental voters, also in Florida for the 2022 midterm. So it was part of an A/B test where we tested 2 different messages against a control group. In this instance, it was based off the behavioral science concept of norm enforcement. So as social animals, human beings are very aware, almost hyper aware of societal norms. We know what the appropriate way to behave is. And usually, not always, but usually we try to conform to that appropriate way of behavior because we are hyper aware of how people view us. So we take advantage of a lot of that in our messaging at the Environmental Voter Project. But one sort of special way that we can do that is instead of messaging to our target voters and saying, hey, conform to this norm, be a good voter, which we often do, by the way. Sometimes we can go a step further and we can say, hey, voter target of ours, low propensity environmental voter, be an enforcer of this norm yourself. Make sure other people in your family or your peer group of friends, make sure they adhere to this norm. Make sure they are good voters. It's almost like we're deputizing people who, by the way, we know are not adhering to this norm, right? We're only targeting people who are unlikely to vote, but we're kind of pushing a badge on their chest, and we're saying, you know what? Make sure other people adhere to this norm. Because in previous tests over text message, and a little bit less so in other areas, but certainly over texts, we had gotten some statistically significant results that showed us this actually does increase turnout. If you deputize people to enforce the good norm of being a consistent voter on others, well, then those people you've deputized, their turnout rates go up. So we thought it was worth testing in kind of a harder environment, a midterm general election in a battleground state. So really, really high baseline turnout. We thought, okay, let's give this a shot. Didn't really work. As we said in the previous experiment, our control group's turnout was 25.0%. In our treatment group, it was 25.2%. Is that an increase in turnout? Yes, but it's not so significant an increase in turnout that with the size of these denominators, we can say that it wasn't due to random occurrence. Or another way of saying it is this was not statistically significant. We cannot claim that this increase in turnout by 0.2 percentage points was solely due to the Environmental Voter Project delivering this message. So those are 2 experiments that we thought were worth trying. And although neither of them succeeded, we hope this helps you understand the kind of work that we do at the Environmental Voter Project. And perhaps more importantly, the thought process that goes into us deciding what types of messages might be useful to test to see if we can come up with a new way to turn non-voters into new voters and then new voters into consistent voters. So thank you for joining us for this mini briefing. Please feel free to share it with your friends. Please subscribe to our YouTube page to get other mini briefings or other long, full-length briefings on our work mobilizing low propensity environmental voters. Thanks.